There's a saying that dependency on military hardware can be fatal. In a conflict scenario, if a country relies heavily on another nation, especially powerful ones like the US, for its weapons, ammunition, or other military technologies, it could find itself in a vulnerable position if those supplies are cut off, or if the supplying nation decides to withhold support. The US has historically used its control over military hardware and technology as a tool of influence and leverage in international relations. India might be the latest victim in this regard, as recent reports suggest that the IAF has expressed dissatisfaction with the current pace of the LCA Mk1A program. The first aircraft from the existing order was initially scheduled for delivery by March 31, 2024. But HAL has faced repeated delays, now projecting delivery for November 2024. However, while HAL has a history of delivery delays, this one can't be blamed on the state-owned firm. The Tejas Mk1A, an advanced 4.5 Gen version of the Tejas Mk1, made its maiden flight in March 2024, boasting updated avionics, an active electronically scanned array radar, and an enhanced electronic warfare suite. An even more advanced version, the LCA Tejas Mark II, is also under development. However, the most essential part of a fighter jet, the engines, are supplied by the US. The F404 engines, also used by the Super Hornets, are needed for the Mk1A variant of the Tejas. The delivery of these engines has reportedly been delayed by approximately 10 months due to supply chain issues. Some defense analysts view this with suspicion, as the US has a history of using defense supply chains as leverage for its geopolitical strategy. Consider Turkey as an example. The US decision to cancel the delivery of F-35 fighter jets to Turkey was directly linked to Turkey's purchase of the Russian S-400 air defense system. This situation shows how pursuing an independent strategic decision against the US might leave a country isolated. The advanced air defense system, received nearly 5 years ago from the Russian state exporter Rosoboronexport, has not yet been activated or put into operation. Some Turkish ministers are even considering selling it to other countries. The US believed that the Russian-made system would jeopardize the F-35 program, of which Turkey was a crucial member. As integrating the S-400 into Turkey's defense network could potentially allow Russia access to critical information about the F-35's capabilities and vulnerabilities. Did India already lose its strategic autonomy by partnering with the US? It is true that, for the US, its interests come first, and all other considerations are secondary. The US's current focal point is China, and it aims to unite as many countries as possible against this common challenge. Some Western analysts believe that for the US, India is not the only partner, but one of many that can support its geopolitical strategy. However, if we consider India's size and population, it is the only nation in Asia that can truly counter China. Some claim that just because India signed agreements like LMOA, BECA, and COMCASA, India and the US are closer than ever before and are gearing up against China's aggressive stance. While it is true that India and the US are closer, they are not allies in the same way as, for example, the UK and Israel are. These agreements with the United States significantly enhance India's defense capabilities by improving communication, intelligence sharing, and logistical support with the US military. For example, COMCASA enables secure and encrypted communication between Indian and US military systems, enhancing interoperability during joint operations. It allows India to access advanced communication systems and technology from the US. However, India retains control over the use of this equipment and can choose when and how to use the secure communication channels. BECA facilitates the exchange of geospatial intelligence, including satellite data, maps, and other geographic information between India and the US. This enhances the accuracy of weapon systems, including missiles and drones, and aids in military planning. However, The agreement operates on a case-by-case basis, with India retaining the discretion to use or not use the shared data. LMOA facilitates logistical support, such as refueling and maintenance, between the US and Indian militaries. However, the agreement is not binding. India retains the right to refuse access to its facilities or resources on a case-by-case basis. So, signing these agreements cannot be seen as India losing its strategic autonomy. There are narratives that suggest India is being pressured or coerced by the US into aligning with its strategic goals, especially in the Indo-Pacific. This view underestimates India's agency in these matters. India has its own strategic interests in countering Chinese influence in the region, which align with those of the US to some extent, but are driven by India's own security concerns and aspirations. India hopes to expand its influence from South Asia to the economically prosperous Southeast Asian and East Asian countries through its Act East policy, which aligns with the US's Indo-Pacific vision. However, the United States hates India's pursuit of strategic autonomy. This was evident recently when India's Prime Minister visited Russia, a common occurrence between the two countries, as their leaders have been visiting each other for decades. India's Western partners, particularly the US, were displeased with this visit. US ambassadors to India even sought to admonish the country, stating that in war, there is no such thing as strategic autonomy.
I know that India, and I respect that India, likes its strategic autonomy. But in times of conflict, there is no such thing as strategic autonomy.
While the assertion that, in conflict, there is no such thing as strategic autonomy, captures the reality that nations often need to cooperate and compromise during conflicts, it may not be entirely accurate. Countries can still strive to maintain a degree of strategic autonomy, even in wartime, by carefully balancing alliances and making decisions that align with their core national interests. For example, during World War II, after Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Soviet Foreign Affairs Minister Vyacheslav Molotov arrived in London to sign a treaty of friendship. However, while Molotov sought to open a second front in Europe, all Churchill could do was confirm that preparations were in progress without making any promises on a date. Even Stalin was desperate for the Allies to open a second front in Europe, as Churchill had discussed with Molotov. But the answer remained the same. On the other hand, Stalin often pursued objectives that aligned with Soviet interests, such as securing Eastern Europe as a buffer zone, rather than simply following Allied strategies. Despite cooperating with the US and the UK, the USSR often acted independently, especially in the latter stages of the war, setting the stage for the Cold War. The most important factor in swaying the Soviets to eventually enter into an alliance with the United States was the Nazi decision to launch its invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. Now, coming back to India, India's foreign policy choices are not binary. In reality, it operates in a multipolar world where it engages with multiple powers, including Russia, the US, the EU, and China, depending on the issue at hand. This flexibility is a hallmark of India's foreign policy. The concept of strategic autonomy is central to India's approach, especially in maintaining its independence in decision-making despite external pressures. On the other hand, the United States wants to win over India quickly, and this hastiness might cost the US in the long run. The truth is, the United States is still wary of India. The US does not want India to maintain good relations with Russia and hopes that India will weaken its cooperation with Russia in the military industry. This is why the US wants to offer India access to advanced technologies that it might not receive from Russia. It has already provided Apache helicopters, Romeo helicopters for the Navy, and Chinook helicopters. Additionally, talks for technology transfer of GE F414 engines are in advanced stages. As India has acquired these assets from the US, there is a risk that the US could delay or restrict the provision of essential parts, potentially affecting the operational readiness of India's defense forces. This is why India's policy of strategic autonomy strives to avoid over-reliance on any single country. And this very concern has driven India to diversify its defense partnerships and seek alternatives to minimize such risks. Excessive pressure from the US to distance India from Russia could strain India-US relations. If the US is seen as being too aggressive in its efforts to win over India, it could backfire, leading to resistance from Indian policymakers and a more cautious approach to deepening ties with the US.